Now, doctors are warning that taking alternative therapies could cause serious harm. This comes after a British medical journal reported the case of an autistic 4-year-old boy who was admitted to hospital after his parents treated him with alternative medicines. Reports suggest the child was recommended 12 different supplements. But can alternative medicines work under the right conditions, or is it a placebo effect for patients? Well, joining me now are pharmacologist Dr. David Cahoon and integrated healthcare specialist Professor David Peters. You can join in too. Tweet me at Jonathan Samuels. A very good morning to you, gentlemen. Thank you very much indeed for being with us. Professor David Peters, if I can start with you first, doesn't this case show that actually alternative therapies can be very dangerous?
Well, it certainly shows that the wrong use of vitamin supplements can be very dangerous. And I think that's very much more widely recognised now than perhaps it was in the past. I don't know the details about this case or who prescribed such an extraordinary cocktail of supplements. But I think it was vitamin D that probably did the damage. And we know that vitamin D in large doses can be a very toxic and dangerous vitamin. That's really all I can say, not knowing the details. But whether we should then say, because these things were prescribed by somebody who wasn't a doctor, therefore there should be no access to therapies that aren't the usual medicine, I think that's a wider and deeper argument, which I hope we'll pursue now.
Yeah, Dr. Cahoon, let me put that to you. Do you think there is a place for alternative therapies as long as they're done in a proper, sensible way in conjunction with a GP, for example?
Well, it's perfectly simple. They're called alternative because they're either unproven or disproven. As soon as an alternative therapy is shown to work, then it just becomes part of medicine and it's no longer called alternative. The trouble is, this was a naturopath who's made these ridiculous and dangerous prescriptions, and they simply aren't trained to spot disease or to know much about physiology. It's actually interesting that University of Westminster, where Dr. Peters comes from, shut down its naturopathy degree 5 years ago, quite rightly. That was after I'd exposed some of the nonsense that was taught on it.
Professor, nonsense. That's what the doctor is saying?
It's very difficult. We for a long time, were trying to explore how complementary medicine might be introduced into a university setting. And the idea of that was so that we could put a lot more science into the degrees and seem to be going into these other trainings. I think the point that I would make about some of these, I prefer complementary to alternative, is that sometimes a therapy like osteopathy or acupuncture fills an effectiveness gap where, particularly in primary care, you're not getting terribly good results in, for instance, musculoskeletal pain or stress-related disorders. And it may be that something like osteopathy or acupuncture adds something to the mix in,
but isn't the problem,
general
Professor
practice.
Peters, sorry to interrupt, but isn't the problem that there just simply isn't enough research into whether or not these sort of therapies work? Isn't that basically the problem, that we simply don't know?
I think it is one of the basic problems, and that's why it's good to have universities involved. That's where research happens.
We do know in the case of acupuncture has been tested more thoroughly than almost any other form of alternative medicine. Over 3,000 trials, and it simply doesn't work. That's now entirely clear.
You don't agree? You don't agree?
I don't agree. I mean, Dr. Calhoun is a very respected laboratory scientist. I would only say that things that happen in a test tube are quite different from what happens in real life, in real people.
It's nothing to do with the test tube. These are trials in people.
They are, and many of them are positive. How you can say that they're not is I mean, that is your opinion. But my observation, looking at the research and actually working with these therapies in real life, is that they are useful.
Dr. Cahoon, isn't the problem...
Well, if you look on my...
Sorry to interrupt. I was just going to say, isn't the problem that doctors in the Western world are pretty much told from day one of their training to be very suspicious about alternative therapies, to be very suspicious about this sort of medicine?
No, they're taught to have regard to evidence. There are one or two things that have come out of alternative medicine. For example, artemisinin from a Chinese herb has proved to be very effective for malaria. But it's not called alternative anymore, it's just been absorbed into medicine. The fact is, a large amount of money has been spent in the United States testing all of these things. There's a branch of the National Institutes of Health in the States which has spent billions of dollars testing them. They haven't come up with a single useful treatment. It's not a question of alternative versus real, it's a question of evidence versus no evidence.
I suppose the other issue is about the placebo effect. Psychologically, somebody may feel that they are getting benefit. They feel mentally that they're better or certainly improving as a result of taking something, whether or not it's actually having a physical effect or not. Would you agree with that, Professor?
Well,
they may do, but the placebo effect...
Who are you talking to?
Yeah, sorry, Professor Peters. You just come in first on that point.
Yeah. It's easy when you're doing a piece of research with a pill or a herb to remove all the human factors. You can do randomized trials and you can really discount the relationship, and you can discount the human effect and belief in the patient. When you're working with a therapy that involves a lot of skill, like acupuncture, osteopathy, involves quite a strong human relationship. It's very difficult to disentangle the technical bit from the human bit. We call the human bit placebo because in drug trials, it's relatively easy to disentangle them. On the other hand, in many drug trials, you get what seems to be a placebo effect in far more than 50% of the outcome. What we're calling the placebo effect is something we don't understand. It isn't just mental. The placebo effect we know can change brain chemistry in very significant ways. Even in Parkinson's disease, you can get
Professor,
changes.
Dr. Cahoon is shaking his head. Let's just get his reaction to that.
Yeah, okay.
The placebo effect's been investigated quite recently in a very thorough way. The effect, when you say you can get 50 or 35% of people getting better on placebo effect, there's two effects going on. One's a genuine placebo effect, which you can investigate by comparing the treatment with no treatment whatsoever. But most of it is actually the get better anyway effect. You know, if you have bad back pain, you go for maybe acupuncture if you're sufficiently misled, and the next day you will feel better, but you'd have felt better anyway because it fluctuates a lot. It's a phenomenon called regression to the mean, far more important than the placebo effect.
Well, it is a fascinating...
I'm afraid Professor Peters is well out of date on his placebo research.
It's a fascinating debate. We must end it there. I'm afraid we are out of time. Dr. Cahoon and Professor David Peters, many thanks indeed.
Thanks, Jonathan.
You're watching Sky News. Lots more still to come.